Hi, my name is Amy Joy. Welcome to this episode of I'm Noticing. While this experiment has been really rewarding for me as a participant, I'm really hoping that anyone listening finds something they can connect to or something that sparks curiosity.
Hello,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm having a moment as my Zoom video settings seem to have really changed. So I was trying to turn whatever is happening off, but maybe I can just get used to it. But that's what was happening for me in this moment was some confusion and feeling disoriented. And attempting to move past that and just be with
Okay.
that. How are you?
Um, Feeling good, which seems to surprise a part of me. Um, yeah, I notice I'm a little bit frustrated with myself at the moment for not focusing before you join the call, because now I just feel like this flooding of thoughts coming at me.
Can really connect to that. I noticed myself comparing, hearing you say that, like the description of thoughts flooding after the call. I'm acting on the impulse to compare as I was prior to the meeting experiencing a flood of thoughts.
Hmm.
Now I'm starting to feel curious about that and slightly guilty for, or no, it's embarrassment that I admitted that I was making a comparison. Yeah.
Hmm.
I also have this noticing the impulse to offer to log out and then log back in 5 minutes.
No, I'm surprised that something that was bothering me earlier today is not bothering me at the moment. Do feel somewhat curious about that, but I can also just feel like this kind of industrious part of me that's just kind of like pushing all of it to the side and trying to like mow its way into some sort of like clear center. Yeah, feel like a spark of appreciation as that kind of realizes itself.
Yeah.
So I finally got around to listening to the last call just like a couple hours ago, walking the dog. So like certain things are very fresh. I remember I was feeling curious about your experience of actually listening. And I was noticing that like I can tend to feel guilty at times because I'm not necessarily listening too closely to the content of what you're saying in the recording, but like I'm really attuned to just like the tone or the cadence or different aspects of your voice and like getting a feeling from that. But there was a part of me that was like guilty, maybe a bit ashamed, like supposing I I should like listen very carefully and rewind if necessary to make sure I understand everything fully.
I know, just feeling a lot of relief hearing you say that. So yeah, there's something very reassuring for some part in my system to hear of a lack of attention to the content. And I'm noticing a worry comes up that sounds like self-deprecating, but I know that that's not how, like, now it sounds like I'm defending myself against myself. That's probably happening. Yeah, it doesn't feel like that really, but just actual like relief, like there's something good about that. And now I'm feeling curious about that, like, yeah, kind of curious about the supposed to part of what you were expressing.
Yeah, there was something else in that. And I remember giving myself license to maybe contextualize something, but now I'm not sure if I'm remembering it. And so, like, as my mind goes blank, I remember thinking like I wanted to ask about your puppy at some point. Not necessarily now, but it's just like finding humor in like my mind presenting that as an option. Yeah, it was interesting when I was listening back too, because I felt off listening to it. Like I was, I don't know, there was something, it just had like a friction to it or something. And then toward the end, I like actually right near the end, I had even noticed that friction more explicitly in the call. And I had forgotten that that had happened. And I was like, oh, yeah. And it felt very validating to like be listening and experiencing this kind of like something is off, like something's just not quite connecting, that kind of thing. Yeah. And I noticed that I can kind of let out some air out of my lungs and feel like a kind of a heaviness relieve itself.
I notice feeling excited as I hear you say that, and then a little bit of, prior to feeling excited, I was feeling some guilt thinking about how I didn't listen to the last recording, specifically because I was like feeling some dread from a part of me to engage with what I was anticipating as attention, or I don't, I notice I'm trying to remember the word that was coming to my mind for it, but something. The excitement feels like right now I'm noticing I'm getting pulled towards like some background sound, um, and feeling frustrated about the split in my attention. Okay. Yeah, the excitement feels related to just like a maybe I'm not fully sure, but something like acknowledgement or acknowledgement of a shared experience that feels relevant. That I notice a lot of frustration around the language, but maybe that can be a starter sentence. Or there's maybe a hope. Yeah, that feels like I'm feeling hopeful about maybe fleshing that out at some point with more language that would be more satisfying for me, for that part of me that wants clarity.
Yeah, I'm noticing that my mind has shifted toward remembering also that there were moments in the call where I did feel connected and there was something clear or like revelatory or something. I notice that feels like fairly freeing or relieving as well. I'm just connecting to this very like heavy, I want to call it like tyrannical, not to judge it, but to like ascribe a tone to it or something. But it's like very demanding and not charitable or not, it's not seeking out things to be pleased with, but it is seeking out things to be displeased with. And it's like then broadcasting all the displeasure through my system. And even if I can like connect to the positives, it feels as though this part kind of begrudgingly accepts it in the moment and has like a little shift, but then it like it's back to work the next day, like nothing or everything's back to usual or whatever. Yeah, and I noticed there's a part of me that's kind of reaching for some sort of kind of like pithy affirmation of like that just goes to show everything can be like um now the words are even escaping me, but kind of like saying like nothing's black and white and like can be positives even in like a difficult experience. Yeah, and I'm just like notice the thought popping up into my head that originated while I was listening back, which was like an intention to be accepting of the kind of forcefulness of that energy. And I notice, I feel a bit of curiosity about that, like what will come of that. But I can also feel like the forcefulness turning back on that and like demanding that something come of it, which kind of like reignites my kind of curiosity. And I notice, feel more like patient around that now.
noticed feeling some sadness as I was relating to the experience I was hearing you describe. And then also noticing like how most immediately I begin to go through like an inventory of things that were, yeah, whatever it's hard, a bit hard to describe, but it feels like a part kind of going through an inventory, and it's like really ready to compare and contrast like dissatisfactions. But there's also I'm noticing I'm describing it in a jovial way when it really doesn't feel that way. So the incongruence is actually uncomfortable, where there's discomfort as I'm noticing the incongruence. And then there's also just a kind of a bit of curiosity, or maybe even like eagerness or to know more about that, or kind of a want to support what that part of me is wanting, as it feels well intended. Or yeah, I'm getting the sense that there's a positive intent. It does feel connected to needs that I'm wanting to support in this experience. Yeah.
I was just noticing this, like, it's not quite disappointment. It's kind of like if you're a kid and your sibling gets like a bigger piece of pie than you or something, or a larger scoop of ice cream. It's that kind of like just pointing it out and saying like, hey, feeling some humor about this whole thing. There's a part that's evaluating whether this is worth mentioning, which is causing me to be all stuck because I notice, yeah, there's quite a bit of pressure in my system to like not leave you hanging. I notice, yeah, I notice I'm wanting ease, so I'm just going to decide to do that. But yeah, the thought was like questioning whether or not you described your experience of listening or not. And maybe you did, or maybe you sort of did. And it's not even like important to me that you did or not, but it's like just this, yeah, this pointing it out. Now I do feel curious, like why that part's showing up. I am noticing like a familiar energy to it of like in these calls, there's like an overhanging little bit of energy in my system that is focused on either like how well I know you or don't know you, or like picking up little clues and like piecing them together and like filling in that image in my mind. And so like this little part has this kind of energy of like popping up to kind of name a missed set of little crumbs that might have been supplied or something. And I noticed I was gonna, my impulse, the thought was to like basically have all that energy like relax or step back. And then I noticed like my awareness of my other intention to be accepting of some pushy energy. I started to feel like a bit of remorse for impulsively wanting to have some energy automatically step back. And I am noticing this general sense of like understanding. Notice, yeah, the words I'm like I have an urge to blurt out the words like you're just really interesting or something like that. And there's like different things that pop up around that, but it's like, yeah, almost wanting like validation or permission. I do notice I feel like a lot of presence and space when I am aware of that energy, and it just kind of feels like off to the side in the corner, and it's not like intrusive or anything. But I do notice that when I'm not aware of it, it's like a little bit more confusing or something.
Was noticing as you were talking, like it was I kind of quickly there's in this current moment, I'm feeling like some finding it hard to name what the feeling is. Like it's like the idea of feeling is guilt, but I think it's more like disappointment as I noticed myself in response to something you said, kind of quickly go like follow like a part in my system showed up with this narrative of like that is like it's definitely familiar outside of this context, but this narrative of like I'm not being vulnerable or like, and there's some like I feel frustration when that's yeah, I feel frustration when I'm making that assessment of what's like towards myself of what I'm either doing or not doing. And then I was also feeling really surprised as I tuned back into what you were saying. Like I'm noticing how that, how getting eclipsed with that narrative really, it felt like almost completely took me away from listening to what you were saying. And then I was surprised to kind of pop back in right as you gave that example of saying like something about being interesting. And then there was like surprise and then confusion and then just some like, I wonder what it would have been like to be present the whole time, or like just kind of, yeah. I also feel some concern of like, oh, I wonder how often, or yeah, there's like a future oriented, like not even future oriented, but it's like I wonder how often I like leave moments, if I'm following, yeah, there's some, a want to be curious, but mostly it feels right now like a concern of, well, now it's starting to feel a little more curious, but around what that, what it might be like for that to be different.
Noticing like a frustration. It's around authenticity. I noticed the thought coming up about an intention or just broadly authenticity. And then I was like, had this thought in my head of how to really be authentic in the moment. And then it felt very like formulaic or technical. And that brings up frustration because for this part of me, it perceives that any direction I move in will feel very formulaic and not authentic. That's kind of connecting me to a lot of the judgment that comes up around my like tyrannical, demanding part. Kind of noticing something that's new. Had this sense pop into my mind that like there's a burden in my system around having to maintain a certain level of like intellectual or analytical energy. I'm just kind of getting the sense that, and I can also feel that there is a part of me that wants to believe this, which makes me a bit skeptical. But there's a feeling of something truthful in this that like maybe being authentic is just easier for me. And that is like a struggle for certain parts that are used to being very active and involved. And I do feel like a real sense of sorrow and like exasperation around that. I kind of picture an office that's working around the clock type of thing, and everyone's like got their top, like their collars unbuttoned and their ties are loosened and their sleeves are rolled up and they're kind of like their hair is a bit messy now. That kind of image. And I can feel myself trying to force something, but I'm actually noticing that there's a bit of like a blanking out around that. Or maybe not around that, but there is a bit of like a blanking out occurring. Which I'm kind of interpreting as like a there's some fear in my system around approaching that possibility or like exploring around it.
Noticing, feeling some fear, feeling fear and tension and an impulse to just start talking in there's I'm noticing a part that would like to just start talking and like say whatever. It feels has kind of a rebellious energy to it. And it seems like it's attempting to alleviate some pressure around saying the right thing or expressing myself in the right way. And as I acknowledge tension around it, there's kind of this, or I'm noticing like an assessment that I shouldn't be like, that would kind of go like, I shouldn't be experiencing this right now. Like I should have, I should be totally curious towards the impulse and the pressure or the fear. Like, I'm surprised to be able to somewhat appreciate the kind of maybe the spirit of that. Like a want to not get stuck. Like I'm wanting not to get stuck in the tension of the impulse to just kind of speak really fast or say a lot versus like feeling stuck with not knowing what to say. Now I'm starting to feel sad at just like imagining how disconnecting this could feel, or in this context, you. Like I'm starting to imagine this must feel very disconnecting. Also familiar, or like, I don't, yeah. I am somewhat aware, like, it's like I'm starting to become aware that that's possibly a projection. But it's like a hard sell, or like maybe there's just openness to either. Yeah, either possibility.
Hmm. Feel some excitement. Do notice that it's somewhat pushy, because I can also feel like a sorrow that's way in the background, kind of crowded out. Yeah, what you're naming is definitely like exciting to the part of me that really is constantly seeking like challenge or novelty. Yeah, and I'm noticing what I want to call New York energy just because of something a client had said. But that's also like kind of connecting into this part of me that's kind of almost wants to be like punished or tortured or something. It's a bit extreme, but put through hardship, I guess. Like the equivalent of like spending a week in the woods with no electricity or really nothing but a knife and a backpack or something. Yeah, and I'm feeling curious about that part because it can be like a really strong influence in my system. Oh, and there's something that's like reconnecting that feels significant but isn't fully present. And I notice a pressure to like be able to explain all the connections fully. Yeah, after I had stopped talking, I was starting to notice that this like tyrannical energy in my system is actually like an expression of disappointment and grief around, I don't know, words I could put to it would be something like the world isn't as wonderful a place as I dreamed it would be as a kid, or something along those lines. So yeah, I was feeling more appreciation for it. I'm noticing there's more of like a push to reconnect to that in the moment. And I'm a little bit surprised to notice that there's now like thoughts coming up around whether what I'm making makes sense from A to B to C is like a clear line. I'm somewhat curious if that's the part in me that's trying to like manage your connection or something.
Noticed feeling really sad and almost maybe something close to desperate hearing you describe the grief. I'm noticing some judgment around an impulse. Noticing judgment come up around an impulse I was noticing to like a part of me wanting to like convince that part of you otherwise. So there's judgment around that, like just let it be, or let grief be grief. And also like, just a awareness that you were connecting to that part of yourself. And there's also some, I'm noticing that I'm feeling frustration around like it feels like it quickly gets intellectual, but it shows up as, or I'm experiencing that part as frustrated and kind of like wringing its hands, or not really wringing its hands, but kind of like pulling at its hair, or it feels a little bit like that or something, like it could be that. And it's like in reaction to this question of like when to respond to another person rather than, it's hard to articulate, but it's like the difference between like I'm starting to feel excited to be beginning to try to articulate this because it comes up a lot in this context, but like the frustration comes up when this part feels like there's like a gulf and then some confusion between like knowing how to relate or connect without breaking rules. In this instance, like it was like it was noticing the concern about like being rescuey or something, or like being or caretaking or something. I'm starting to wonder if that's like I'm starting to question clarity, or like if I'm expressing that with clarity, but I'll stop there.
Just noticing excitement as I was feeling curious about something you were describing. Excitement's it's like a hopeful, so there's a hopeful part of me that was perceiving that curiosity as like evidence that I'm, I don't know, holding space in the container in a certain way that like is creating enough space for me to kind of react to you. Not feeling self-conscious about my description. Yeah, I started to feel like curious about other things you were saying. I was remembering things where I felt curious last time. And in retrospect, I'm noticing how this kind of like pushy part was steering me away from like curiosity toward you and like really driving me down into expressing, having a different expression that felt more like insular. Yeah, I noticed like a lot of freedom showing up around like being able to be curious or being able to express it. Can feel some like hopeful excitement kind of at the edge of my system from like the parts of me that don't like this process and are like, oh, we found a loophole, didn't we? We're about to completely break this thing open. Um, And I'm just sitting with this question. It's like a curiosity about your experience, and I'm just kind of like sitting with it, noticing like the different energy to it. I'm also kind of like testing if it's real curiosity or if like some part has built like a Trojan horse in my system and like smuggled a question through. I notice I feel like relief that it feels genuine, but it does not feel genuine to actually ask the question now after all that prelude. So I worry about your reaction to that.
I well, right now I'm very torn because was really feeling, I really had a feeling, and then I'm also like have the impulse to, which makes sense to me. This impulse makes sense to me. I'm going to act on it. Wait, is that allowed? I'm just going to act on it. And then this impulse to apologize for the background noise or express like maybe just like maybe I'm oh yeah no I'm feeling disappointed about the extent to which the background noise, like I took a risk, I tried a different location and like it's very loud, but maybe it's not loud on that end, in which case it's still distracting. And so that anyways I was feeling some disappointment, kind of interrupted what I was experiencing as enjoyment. Here, like hearing you decide to not ask the question, or just like there was something, or something felt joyful about. I felt a mix of like joy and like hope around, like as I heard you express a concern about how I might respond to that, but while honoring like the maybe I'm feeling self-conscious around how much descriptive language I'm using, but like choosing not to ask the question. I'm noticing that I'm noticing that uh, I'm noticing discomfort. I'm noticing discomfort. That's accurate. And then a part of me is kind of like bringing up a question from earlier of like, part of me starts to ask a question, but I feel it's like asking the question of whether I'm actually describing my experience of listening to you versus something else. The something else is not clear, but I notice some fear. I notice I'm feeling fear saying that out loud, as like, because that question, it's like a part of me is co-opting something you said earlier. Co-opting might not be the right word, but a part of me like took something you said earlier and is bringing it up as a question in my mind. And then there's like noticing this impulse to like go into a long explanation about, based on this assumption that you would worry about like yeah, part of me starts to make this assumption that I vocalized that that question was coming up, that a part of you would like feel like you can't speak freely without some part of me like taking certain things, and like that's not very clear. I'm struggling around languaging it, but what is clear is I'm noticing that there's a part of me making an assumption, and then very quickly like there's this impulse to like explain, like give this like long backstory or explanation about why you wouldn't need to worry about that. And then I'm just really marveling about how all of that can happen based on that like assumption about what you, how you might feel about a thing I said. It's yeah, there's like it's both amazing and something else, something like terrifying, but that sounds a bit, that feels more dramatic than it feels.
Hmm. I notice a really tight clenching through my body. So I'm like trying to hold on to a thread of thought, more insight even than thought. Notice a bit of fear showing up as I imagine speaking it out loud, which doesn't seem to have to do with the content as much as I think there's an uncertainty about like what I'm not seeing that may be attached to this. But I noticed feeling some guilt around expressing worry for how you would react to what I said. So there was a part that was kind of like scolding me and like assigning me responsibility for creating that reaction in you. And then I was kind of thinking about, well, I was accepting some of that responsibility as valid and like reviewing what it was I said and why I said it. Yeah, I was noticing that like I didn't actually really feel worry for how you would react. It was almost like a perfunctory, performative thing I said with like the tiniest flavor of truth to it. Yeah, like feeling curious about that, just noticing that like why was I doing that? And what's showing up for me is like in lieu of like having a more clear connection between us. Like there's this part of me that has latched on to this kind of like humor infused mutual worry that we express back and forth. And it's like, I don't know, it's like a secret handshake or something. I don't know how to describe it, but it takes on this quality of like signifying some sort of like connected understanding or something, or like mutuality that brings comfort to my system. And I'm starting to wonder what it might feel like to be aware of that and like not indulge in that. And I noticed the thought also popping up of like, shouldn't there be some sort of connection that's just based on like the amount of sharing back and forth? Like, why is it a particular thing like that that is this part is latching onto? I'm noticing that, yeah, seeing you like laugh or smile or like find humor in something is more reassuring to this part than just participating and sharing would be. Yeah, and I'm noticing I kind of got disconnected from this earlier, but the thought had crossed my mind at one point when you were talking quite a while ago. Like I was feeling curious, maybe a little bit like worried about whether you were getting value out of this call today. I'm kind of feeling that like that kind of humorous automatic thing is coming out as a way to like fill that void of uncertainty and make sure that there's some positive connection or the illusion of one at least. I don't. I'm also noticing a bit of frustration after like explaining all of that. There's kind of a sense of like not being sure what this all means.
I notice the impulse again from what feels like that same part that wants to, it shows up like, oh, like it wants to express a lot. Like let's just it. I'm feeling frustrated as I try to put language to it. It wants to like in its perception, or there's, yeah, to like break out of the container and just be like, oh, let's settle that question because I have a lot that I could express about the value I'm getting from this call and all the calls. So I guess I'm really noticing how it that part doesn't expect the container to allow for expression of that, which I'm wondering about. Like it's kind of like it only believes there's this one way, or not just one way, but it's just like really frustrated with the challenges of trying to express. So it's like it gets to a certain point where it's like, okay, I've had it with like the attempts to express something important, and it's like I'll handle this right now. um and so I feel a bit more like yeah, I feel some affection towards it, and also some like yeah, compassion. I'm kind of like, yeah, like I can definitely understand, or I have a sense of the feelings it wants to alleviate, like the like feeling powerless, or shame around the challenges of trying to express something important and feeling unable to. So that's that's what I'm noticing right now.
Hmm. Noticing like a wave of indifferent rebelliousness of like being uncertain but unconcerned about whether I'm cheating or not. Yeah, I notice listening to you say that, I feel curious about the belief that is limiting that part's perception of what you can do in this process. I kind of notice like the image of someone breaking out of some, I don't know what it is exactly. So I'll just rephrase it to like taking off like a really heavy backpack, maybe after like hiking to the top of like a really tall cliff or something, and taking off their heavy backpack and just like stretching out in the sun and like feeling more sense of like lightness. Um, yeah, there's like an urging in my system of like, do that.
Notice notice feeling lighter and beginning to like yeah, I feel lightness and relief, and then as I start to imagine, like, what if I did just do that, or um what if, yeah, there was some sadness that I'm kind of wondering about, like, or I don't fully know what that is. It's like, mm, it feels like there's the sadness is coming from a part of me that keeps like trying to do what its like idea of the container is, which is not as yet fully explored. Like I'm like, oh, who knows what that is. I feel kind of like that wasn't very kind to that. Wasn't exactly a kind attitude. But yeah, this part is like has some sadness over like I'm noticing it's not so much rooted in like the idea of just like being more free, but it's specifically like I'm noticing hearing I kind of disconnected from it briefly, and I'm noticing that. Um, but it felt more like I was tuning into the background sounds. But no, there's sadness around. There's something really important about this process or about what this part wants from being challenged in this context or like uh, growing in its expression. And also I'm getting the sense that it's like very concerned about what might happen if just like unfiltered another part of me just like is like whatever, I'm just gonna say whatever. And I can sort of appreciate that. Like I'm like it's like I suspect a little bit like I'm like, yeah, I get that. Um, that's what I'm noticing is just I am curious about that because it feels like I don't fully know why, or yeah, I don't have, I'm kind of just wondering what it might look like for there to just be more space for both of these. And also just, I'm suddenly like, I don't want to forget to just express how, or there's something I don't want to forget to express. Not exactly, I don't have the words for it right now. So hopefully I'll be able to connect to that at some point.
Yeah, listening to you talk, I notice I'm feeling curious what my relationship to the container is. I notice what pops up is like a really kind of like sour Yosemite Samish type. Well, not comical in that way, but like bitter kind of. Yeah, there's actually, I'm feeling curious to slow down. I'm wondering if that is like my perception of the container, if that is a part responding to it. Yeah, it does feel like a response to it. It's like an interesting sensation to it that's kind of familiar from when I was young, of being like trapped, seemingly like in one spot more or less, without being actually physically stuck in that spot or like coerced into that spot. It's like a certain uneasiness. So I'm noticing like the sense of safety and just staying still. And I'm just recognizing when you started talking, I was kind of feeling sense of dismissiveness toward the process, and like this expectation that I was just going to start speaking more normally, or like, yeah, not even like try. Although that is bringing up the humor I felt last time when I was like, quote unquote, cheating. But then technically, I think everything I expressed was actually within the intentions. Yeah, and now I'm starting to feel curious about like what the belief is in my system that's telling me I can't express certain things. And I'm noticing for like that approximately 5-year-old boy that I can picture in this room I spent a lot of time in growing up. For him, it's a sense of like there's a hostility in the house that's elsewhere. And so like there's a need to just stay put. I'm kind of gonna say I'm curious what's triggering that, but that even feels like an assumption. Like maybe there's nothing like that happening here. Yeah, and I'm also noticing, being reminded of listening back to the last call, and I was reminded of something that happened and my awareness that I had not followed up or checked in on any of the parts or energy or any of it. And see, I can feel a sense of just feels like friction at the moment in my stomach, but kind of like a fist pressing into like the palm of the other hand type of friction or pressure of like it's a lot of should energy of like I should be like following up more with the things. So I think I think there's another belief around this process that says like it ends and then it like is on timeout until we start up again the next week. And then like these things are isolated into this process. Even though that's demonstrably not true from previous experience. It's like, or it feels more one way, like I can extract insight about the outside world here, but I can't take things from here into the outside world to like commit energy toward or focus. I mostly just want to stop talking because I have the perception that I've been talking a long time.
I'm noticing getting noticing what feels like a little bit more clarity between like the part that wants to throw off what it perceives as shackles, and the other part that is like very serious about the process. And then there's this noticing this I'm noticing a pressure to be able to feels like a part wanting to it's kind of like give credit where credit is due kind of thing, or it wants to like be able to pinpoint the exact um like words that you said that my my parts were responding to, or kind of like noticing the pressures like this want to express like appreciation for how helpful it is. Yeah, I'm unclear if I'm like noticing the pressure, or if I'm beginning to like act on the impulse that the pressure wants me to act on. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Um, yeah, there was like a want to like express a there's happiness and what feels like gratitude around like like the experience of gaining more clarity, um, and somewhat attributing that to like there's a want to like put language to like how put language to how it feels like a shared process, or like a there's something supportive about something I'm experiencing in this context that is supportive of the process of getting clarity. And then I've got a part that's like just like getting so bored as I'm talking. Like it's just like eye rolling. And I appreciate that. Um, I like wishing I had a notebook so I could like take a note about that, but maybe I can just do so later. Yeah, there's something. I think I lost touch with the clarity, or like I'm feeling some like slight disappointment that I'm like kind of in this current moment unable to really articulate what was feeling like clarity. But I still feel like the clarity aspect of it, but I don't have the language around. I don't feel able to express what is integrating about those. The awareness. I don't know. Are you still there?
Mhm.
Okay. I'm feeling kind of this interest or commitment to exploring that yeah, like impulse to just say whatever versus the want to find expression within the container. If and it feels like the impulse the impulse to just say whatever is like I'm appreciating that it's reacting to like getting feeling stalled, or like it is making a point about certain challenges that are coming up for me within the container, which I realize is the point. Yeah, it's kind of that does feel I'm feeling interested to explore that more and just I'm noticing that I'm talking as I lost it. Like I'm like I can feel I don't know I don't exactly have a word for the feeling, but I hear my words are like filling filling space where I lost touch with it. Or which, yeah, I have a working theory that that might be a little bit of self-consciousness around something, but maybe we'll see. Yeah.
Feel some excitement around you throwing off the shackles of certain expression. Have like an aversion to this wording because it's so cliche, but it's also so cliche that in like NVC that it fits. But it's like this perspective of kind of like you will add if you do that, you'll add a layer of difficulty or just like a different dynamic or something to my container. And that will like make it exciting or challenging And there's like so the cheesy thing is like there's like a gift in that from you to me. I can barely like maintain eye contact as I say it. Yeah, I noticed that feels really exciting actually. Yeah, and I feel like curiously content as I kind of just have nothing else to say after that, even though I was aware there was like another connected thought to it previously. It's kind of coming back to me. Yeah, I was feeling curious about. Now I'm not sure if this is the same one or not, but I do feel curious about it in the moment, which is like this is kind of like an extreme way of putting it to like fully go like turn it all the way up to 10, but like I really mean it more like 60% or 70% of the way, but it's like curiosity if you feel the freedom in this process to like hypothetically connect to a part and like unburden it just to be super extreme about what you could do in theory.
I noticed the impulse to answer this question and questioning whether or not it's a real question or and then I'm feeling a little bit risky, like I might just risk treating that as a real question and just see what happens. Oh, like immediately I was like, no, like even, and I was literally, I was like, for some reason, when you said 60, 70%, I was like, I feel like I have an exact like idea in my mind of what that would be for some reason. I was like, that makes sense. But then I was like, oh, absolutely not. Like that the other part that has like a scroll of like rules that it doesn't want to break, it's like, oh yeah, I know that's like definitely somewhere on that list of like rules that it wouldn't break. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but even as I say that right now, I'm kind of like I guess I'm beginning to wonder what what is that rule about. And it's not even, it's like the language of rule feels very distinctive to like how that part is perceiving it, or like not really representative of all of me. But it's like, why wouldn't I feel free to like unburden? I have like a taking a moment with that. I mean, that part's kind of like, well, you should be doing that work like outside of this time so that when you're in this container, like you're not showing up really burdened or polarized. I mean, this part has a lot of IFS conceptual language. So it's like if you're like, don't show up and unburden your parts, like that means you're not like working, doing your quote unquote like work outside of this time. And it's like I'm getting the sense that for that part, that the idea of like me doing that would be like egregious. but it doesn't, like, it's very specific to me. Like I'm aware that there have been instances during these calls where I've like wondered if I just witnessed like you somewhat unburdening a part in like kind of in a particular kind of way, or like that sounds I worry about how that yeah, this part is just like case in point, like see how that sounded. Oh, and yeah, but yeah, it is specific to me. But I am kind of starting to I'm starting to kind of feel interested. I'm feeling really grateful for that question too, because I'm like, oh, that's very this also feels like a something in something that's moving me a little closer towards clarity. And now my like um vague timekeeping part is showing up, and I'm unclear how long I've been talking. Yeah, I'm noticing a want to there's like a pressure to be like skeptical or suspicious of this impulse, but there's like an impulse to be like, how are you doing? Yeah.
Hmm. I do. Yeah, I notice like all of a sudden a little bit of judgment is showing up. It's like a little, it's very tiny. It's not prominent, but it's like a little voice in my head that's saying I must be doing something wrong if you don't experience the freedom to like the image in my head in exaggerated form is like you can just take 2 hours to work through a part and like go as far as you want. And like I should be able to create a comfort that that space is there, even though that doesn't seem right to like this process in any way. I could imagine a very nuanced circumstance where maybe that just feels totally correct. But yeah, and I appreciate noticing that voice and how like small it feels because it's reminding me of a previous instance where like I extracted the value of that message, like wanting to create comfort or space or freedom while not accepting like the burden of responsibility that that part is attaching to it. I notice that feels freeing again. I'm having a sense that like a need for consistency is being met in my system that is kind of prompting that to occur. Yeah, I can still feel that part is there trying to like it's almost like a rock climber like reaching to find little tiny cracks and crevices to reach into and hold on to. This part is like reaching around looking for things to grab onto that will be like you're not enjoying this process, or like I'm making you uncomfortable or something, like anything along those lines that it can latch onto. And just the consistency of you like showing up and expressing some positive regard for this process is like smoothing that wall out and creating like a lot less cracks and crevices for it. I'm kind of enjoying that.
I'm noticing some of like a sigh of relief or a part that's like really eager to express all the things, but kind of like has felt compressed or unable to express. And so in this moment, it was kind of like, oh, like some things are just like some things can just be evident without this part of me having to say all the things. Just noticing that. And for some reason, feels a bit mysterious. A part showing up with the perception that I broke a rule or something. And I'm noticing having a new experience of catching that like right in the moment and then not feeling fully eclipsed by it. So that's exciting. I'm feeling happy about that, along with some discomfort of that coming up, some discomfort, but feeling happy to be having an incrementally new experience around that. I was also noticing an impulse to like, I noticed this impulse to be, to, to like initiate the end of this meeting because it's like there was this awareness that I don't think I've ever done that. Or like, I feel like you always are. I don't know if that's true, but in this moment, I'm noticing there's this um, perception that you're always the one that like speaks for like a conclusion of the meeting, and then it's like yeah, I was kind of noticing I'm noticing that the impulse was like there, but also just for some reason like yeah, like not a clear impulse about how to organically do that. And then now I'm wondering about the idea that it has to be organic. Um,
Hmm.
I'm also wondering about the assumption that that would be like a relief for you to have a break from being the one to do that. That's like an assumption that I'm now aware of making.
Hmm.
And it's hard to get curious about, is what I'm noticing.
Yeah, I think the one thought that I'm can feel myself holding on to it from like a kind of a preachy soapbox standing part. Because this has like not quite psychoeducational, but more like mental health meme level energy to it. But I was noticing like after I stopped talking last time, and like I could feel a pretty big shift into like listening to you. And I noticed like a sympathy, yeah, like an empathy for both of us about like how difficult it is to like kind of stay centered or stay clear in the process of like constantly switching in and out, which is like so different from either being like a practitioner or being a client, which is much easier, generally speaking. And and yeah, I was kind of thinking like, oh, but that's like what pretty much any conversation is like it, except it's even more like unconscious. And so I like started like really thinking, or I started like really getting like curious about it. And I don't know, some part of me finds there's something worth preaching in that.
Notice feeling excited and intrigued. There was, uh, I also noticed the having, I also noticed a thought of how many conversations don't require feeling, which that was I noticed the thought and then kind of a um, interest of whether that's there's a question. There was interest, but now it's starting to turn into like to something else, or there's a hesitation around what's about to happen as I continue to talk about that thought that I had, and whether there's fear about could I, yeah, stay connected to the feeling even as I said the thought. I feel appreciation also just around them. Right now, I'm noticing like I am just connecting to kind of your original, just appreciating the like shared empathy, compassion you were expressing. And then I'm feeling uncomfortable trying to express anything around that. And then I'm wondering what that means. Which is breaking a rule.
Hmm.
Like, don't analyze or something. Anyways,
think I am complete.
That's good.